Hey, it's Rachel. It's pouring rain, so I am filming from the greenhouse today. But I have recently seen squash bugs, striped cucumber beetles, and vine borers active in my garden, all attacking my squash plants. And if I am seeing them, then I suspect other people are too. I thought I would post a short video on what each of these pests are, how they affect your crops, and most importantly, what you can do to address all of them at the same time. I've made a basic table here with the attributes for each of these pests. It's important to understand the basics of their life cycles if you want to control them. I'll start with the insect type. The squash bug, like the name suggests, is a bug. We use bug kind of as a generic word. Technically, it is an insect with a straw-like mouthpiece. The squash bugs use this mouth to drain juices from the plant when they're adults. They lay their eggs on the underside of the leaves. They're kind of these copper-colored eggs I've shown here in this picture. And they do tend to put them at the base of those veins. So if you look in those V-shaped areas on the bottoms of leaves, that's often where the eggs will be. What hatches are nymphs, meaning small adults, and they do have a mouthpiece much like the mature one. They also have this kind of straw thing, and they also use it to suck juices from the leaves of your plants. It'll cause wilting if you've got a young plant. A mature plant, it's more of a nuisance than anything else, but with a bad infestation, it can get out of hand. So you do want to manage these. The best stage to try and kill them is the eggs. Much easier to get rid of eggs than it is to get rid of the adults. Moving on to the cucumber beetle. Again, as the name suggests, this is a beetle. The adults do a lot more damage than the squash bugs will. They eat the leaves of the plants, the blossoms, and the fruits. And perhaps causing the most damage, they spread disease. So things like mosaic virus or certain bacterial wilts. These beetles will carry that from plant to plant to plant. And they are probably going into gardens other than yours. You have no idea what they might expose your plants to. Consequently, you do want to nip these guys in the bud. The bad news is they lay their eggs at the base of the stem where it can be really, really hard to see them. I didn't even bother putting in a picture here. And when they hatch, what comes out is larvae, right? So these are beetles, so their kind of baby stage is a completely different form. They come out as a wiggly, soft-bodied larvae, and they burrow into the soil where they eat the roots of your plants. That can cause some damage on its own. They then pupate in the soil, transform into a beetle, and climb out to continue the life cycle. The best stage to kill these guys is the larvae, and I'll talk about how to do that in a second. Vine borers are a moth. They do move around during the day. That's unusual for moths, and they do look kind of like a wasp because of their coloring, but they're just a moth. The adults don't do any damage. In fact, they're actually a pollinator. They lay their eggs, much like the cucumber beetles do, at the base of the stem, and what hatches out is a caterpillar. Much like the cucumber beetles, these guys have to go through a metamorphosis. The problem is these caterpillars, right? So what they do after they hatch is they immediately burrow into the vine of your plant. As you can see from this delightful photo, the caterpillar is in the middle there. The little black thing is its head on the left, and its body is kind of coming down the middle of the vine. That's why these are called vine borers. It has nothing to do with the adult stage. They're named after what they do in the caterpillar stage, and that is to completely destroy your plants. Now, the problem with vine borers in particular is that you aren't going to see any signs of damage until they're already in the stem. And once they're in there, they're really hard to kill. They're hard to get rid of. You've pretty much just lost the plant, especially if they've gone through the main stem. And so for this one, much like the others, the best stage to try and kill these guys is the caterpillar stage before they get into the stems. All right, so those are the three insects and the damage that they cause. Let's talk about what you can do to get rid of them. First, prune off all the lower foliage of your plants. You want to prune off your squash foliage anyway to help prevent things like powdery mildew, but it is also helpful for these three pests. The squash bugs in particular like to hide out at the base of your plants, and when you keep this foliage gone and you keep the soil line clean, it's much easier to spot them and kill them as adults. It is also helpful, I've kind of shown a dashed check mark here, for the cucumber beetles and the vine borers because it makes steps 2 and 3 much easier. Steps 2 and 3 are to apply a BT spray to the base of the plant. This is a naturally occurring bacteria. You can buy this as a spray and apply it directly to the plants. It only affects soft-bodied insects. In particular, it goes after caterpillar and larvae. It does not affect earthworms. It does not affect bees. It's safe to use. So I generously apply this to the base of the plant. The reason being, as soon as the beetle larvae or the vine borer caterpillars hatch, they will immediately encounter this BT and get infected by it. Step 3 is to then sprinkle diatomaceous earth at the base of the plant, and it'll kind of cling to where you just sprayed this BT spray. The diatomaceous earth is a physical control mechanism. This is a finely ground fossil powder. It has super sharp edges and it will cut into soft-bodied insects. It is important in this case not to work this into the soil. You just want it essentially coating the stem of your plant. The reason is diatomaceous earth, unlike BT, can affect earthworms, and you don't want to just be decimating the earthworm population around your plants. But if you focus on getting it on the stem of the plant and maybe a little bit just on the very surface of the soil, as soon as the larvae and the caterpillars hatch out, if the BT infection doesn't kill them, they then have to crawl through this spiky diatomaceous earth. It will cut into them. It will then desiccate them and remove the water from their bodies. Between those two steps here, we've effectively knocked out the cucumber beetles and the vine borers at their most vulnerable stage. To further work on the squash bugs, step 4, as you're pruning your plants anyway, which you should be doing, just go ahead and spray the underside of the leaves with a neem oil mixture. Couple of reasons to do this. With the squash bugs, if there are any eggs on there, I mean, first, if you see them, just wipe them off at the same time. But applying that neem oil on the bottom will kill any eggs that you miss. The second benefit is that neem oil can help prevent powdery mildew, and that can affect squash plants especially. It's kind of like a 2-for-1, where you can go through and treat an insect infestation and a potential mold problem. So I do like using neem oil for that reason. The nice thing about this is if you happen to see a cucumber beetle adult on there while you're spraying the leaves, you can hose these guys down too. It will kill the adults. It doesn't do anything to vine borer moths, but it will get those cucumber beetles. And then step 5, I mentioned before, just physically remove those eggs. So if you do spot them, do try and remove them. You can use sticky tape wrapped around your finger to pull them off. Because I'm spraying with neem oil anyway, I tend to just wipe them off as I'm kind of spraying with that neem oil, almost like I'm washing the leaf with it. But whatever works for you, just if you spot those eggs, do go ahead and remove them. And then last but not least, you can catch and remove the adults. I mentioned before, the most effective time to control these insects is not in their adult stage, but certainly if you see them, go ahead and try and get rid of them. Squash bugs, as I mentioned, tend to congregate around the base of the plants. You can either just look for them and kill them when you find them. They move pretty slow. Or one way that you can find the squash bugs is to lay on the ground something like a piece of cardboard or some newspaper. They will congregate under that, and then in the morning you can come, flip it over, find the bugs, and kill them. For cucumber beetles, I find that they like to hang out inside the flower blossoms of my squash. Makes sense, they're the same color, and it's a really good kind of camouflage mechanism for them. In particular, if you look in the morning, you'll often find these guys mating inside of the flowers. They die happy, I guess. But the nice thing about this is, first, you get 2-for-1. You can kill more of them faster. And 2, they're much harder for them to escape. They're just physically occupied. And so killing them is much, much easier. The vine borers, honestly, I rarely see them. I think I've spotted like 2 in my garden. If you get lucky and you happen to catch the adult, absolutely try and kill it. But for those guys in particular, I very much focus on controlling them in the caterpillar stage. A couple more things you need to do. 1, I mentioned it was raining today. You have got to go back after a rain and reapply the BT and reapply the diatomaceous earth. These are topical treatments. They will just wash off in the rain and no longer be effective. So you do need to go through and reapply them. The second thing to keep in mind is when you're seeing these bugs, it's a good idea to check your other plants. There is a potato beetle that looks a lot like a cucumber beetle. And while what I'm seeing, generally speaking, are all over my squash plants, it just made me wonder if I might also be occasionally spotting a potato beetle and not realizing it. I did go check my potato plants. I flipped over the leaves, took a look. No signs of eggs. So far, I appear to be free of potato beetles. I also went through and looked at my watermelon plants and my melon plants just to make sure that they weren't getting affected by some of these insects because they are in the same plant family. And just because it's not their sort of, preferred food doesn't mean they won't go after it. Generally, you don't want to just protect and treat one or two of your plants, there's a chance that they'll simply move on to something else in your garden. And it's important to manage the whole garden holistically and not just focus on one or two things. Last, what not to do. So, this is my usual making all of the mistakes so that you guys don't have to. I applied my neem oil at the wrong time. I saw these eggs and I just went, I gotta kill it. And I went and grabbed the neem oil and I sprayed down the leaves and I scraped off the eggs and I was all proud of myself. Totally forgot that if you put neem oil on during the day and the oil doesn't have a chance to dry before it gets hit with sun, it'll burn your leaves. Sure enough, that is what happened in my case. I sprayed this on when it was kind of overcast, but within 30 minutes of me applying this spray, the clouds parted, July sun went beating down on the garden, and a whole bunch of my leaves got fried. This one is sad. Okay, this squash plant had the worst infestation, and consequently, I got a little, I would say, over enthusiastic with my neem oil application. I pruned off a lot of the plant. I sprayed it generously with neem on all the leaves that were left, and as you can see, I basically killed this thing. It possibly could recover. I think I'm just going to pull this one out of the ground and replace it with a tomato. Damaged plants can send out some stress pheromones, and that can attract additional pests. What I don't want to do is start attracting a lot of pests to this plant and have them then transfer from there onto the rest of the healthy squash plants. So sadly, I think this one's a goner. I'm going to take it out, replace it with a tomato. But a good example of what not to do. Do not get overzealous in treating the squash bugs. I think the plant could have survived the insects. It's not going to survive me. That is how you manage squash pests. Remove the adults, remove the eggs, spray it with neem oil, not in the middle of the day. Do it in the evening. Give the plants a chance to dry off before the morning sun comes back up the next day. Prune off the lower leaves of the plants and then apply BT spray and diatomaceous earth right there at the base of the plant where it meets the soil. So far, this regimen seems to be working pretty well for me, other than that one squash plant that I killed. Squash plants appear to be surviving just fine so far with the insects, and I'm noticing, since I started this regimen, a distinct drop in their populations. If you live in a climate like mine with a shorter growing season, I'm up in Michigan, they only have one generation a year. Some of the southern states with longer growing periods, the good news is you have a longer growing period. The bad news is they might have 2 or even 3 generations, and you really do have to stay much more on top of these insects. In my case, if I can knock out this first generation of eggs on the leaves and adults as they're mating, I can hopefully prevent any issues for the rest of my gardening season. Fingers crossed. I will let you know if this continues to work. So far, I'm optimistic. And do not put neem oil on in the middle of the day. Until next time, thanks.